Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Cade Bonzel and I'm joined by my friend Andrew Duvall, and this is going to be our review for Halloween from 2018. All right, now Andrew, Halloween from 2018. I think that this might actually be my favorite Halloween sequel. I think my favorite Halloween movie is probably still the first one, but out of them all, I think this might be the strongest sequel of them all.
I definitely think it's up there. I also am a really big fan of Halloween 2 because I like how it picks up immediately where the first story left off. But this is definitely up there. I'd say five, if not top three. It's certainly better than a lot of the junk we got in the 90s and early 2000s.
And I think that what's so great about it is, I mean, I like how it takes place 40 years later and how it does essentially disregard all the other sequels. It's its own timeline in that way. But what I think is great about it, one of the things that I always enjoy is it's actually a nice reimagining of the first movie. And I say reimagining instead of remake because it does recreate certain elements from the first film, but in a totally different way. And it creates its own narrative. And it's a good way to reimagine what the first one was and recreate certain themes and elements from it and also apply it to its own film as well.
And I completely agree on that. Yes, there is quite a few similarities in plot between the original Halloween and Halloween 2018, but there's also enough distinct differences that I think makes it stand on its own as well.
Yeah, and it's great to see Laurie and Michael again, to see their rivalry once again revisited. And I'd say it's not exactly the same as Halloween H2O because this time they're not brother and sister. And I actually wanted to touch on that for a second. Do you like how they eliminated the storyline where she and Michael are siblings, or do you think they should have kept that?
I kind of like that they eliminated it. In all honesty, mind you, if we got about eight different timelines in this franchise, I feel like in hindsight, unless you really, really like the Cult of the Thorn stuff, which I do not, I feel like the whole Laurie and Michael being siblings thing really doesn't actually add that much. I think taking that away actually almost kind of makes Michael scarier because it's just he likes killing and he's very, very good at it. The fact, and another reason why is that he's not supernatural in any way in the original Halloween or in this one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what's nice about the fact that they get rid of the sibling storyline is it's a way to eliminate the whole idea that the hero always needs to have a personal connection to the villain. And I get that it's compelling, but I think it's nice when there are times when the hero doesn't have a personal connection to the enemy because it shows you they can just be natural enemies. And that's always interesting to see.
Yeah, and one thing I liked is that it seems like Laurie kind of, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a minute when we actually talk more about Jamie Lee Curtis's performance, but it almost feels like Michael is still tormenting Laurie over the course of all these years later, but Michael could care less about Laurie herself. It's this weird kind of yin yang relationship. So
Yeah, it is pretty much that way. And yeah, why don't we talk about Laurie Strode in this movie? So first off, Jamie Lee Curtis, she came back 40 years after playing the character back in 1978, which she also did reprise in a couple of the sequels. But all in all, I think that this was her standout as Laurie Strode. I really loved her performance in the movie. She just gives a powerful lead performance. And one thing that I think she captured really well in her performance was the portrayal of trauma, specifically what happened to her 40 years prior.
yeah, and not a lot of horror movies do this, but it shows okay, yeah, you just went through this horrifically traumatizing event. How does that impact the rest of your life? And in the case of Lori, it kind of ruined basically their entire rest of her life. I mean, they said she was married and divorced, what, three times? Like she's estranged from her daughter and granddaughter. She's kind of seen as just this sort of crazy recluse out in the woods.
Yeah, and what's great about it, just seeing her again, seeing how much she grew in those 40 years, how she just prepared for all that time, waiting for him to escape so that she could finally kill him. I think it's a great reminder of how iconic of a horror protagonist Laurie Strode really is.
Yeah, I it's a great evolution of the character. You know, she goes from being this very timid and shy, every girl in the first movie, and now she's this, again, deeply traumatized, but she's battle hardened and she's ready. It's like she's got nothing else to live for, and she that's perfectly portrayed.
Yeah, and aside from Laurie, another thing that this movie did incredibly well was Michael himself. Michael in this movie was done so well, and I actually really liked how he's obviously played by two different actors in this movie. I'm so glad that they brought back Nick Castle. obviously James Jude Courtney played Michael for the majority, but the fact that they actually got Nick Castle to come back after 40 years just to play the part in a cameo was just such a unique thing to add. And it was just such a nice idea to know, wow, so both Laurie and Michael from the first movie were back together in the same movie. And that was just such a cool idea knowing it about the movie when you watch it.
Yeah, and again, it kind of further ties these two together as, shall we say, the maybe the most consistent timeline in this franchise. Because again, there's what, 5 or 6 of them easily.
Yeah, there's quite a few timelines, but yeah, it was nice to see that. And also just Michael in general. What's nice about him in this movie is that he's actually scary. And it doesn't matter if he's in his early 60s right now or anything. He's still portrayed so terrifying. And I think a big part of that is the fact that he's portrayed more human than he was in most of the sequels. Because think about this, in the sequels, as they kept making more of them, Michael became sort of like what happened to Jason Voorhees. He became like a zombified killer. You kept killing him and he kept coming back and he kept coming back and he kept coming back. And unfortunately, just in my opinion, that made him less terrifying. Having this Michael, who hides in the shadows, pops out and gets you and doesn't just get shot or stabbed repeatedly and then comes back. The way they did it in this movie was a lot more terrifying.
Yeah, the fact that he just kind of, the fact that he survived, number one, survives getting shot. Number two, survives the house blowing up and being on fire. And the fact that, again, he's not supernatural in any way. He does take licks and hits, but he just keeps getting up and going on. He's like the Terminator for almost. But the fact that he's completely human and not supernatural anyway, it's like, that's terrifying. So you got to be thinking, like, how the hell do we kill this guy? I mean,
Yeah,
do we got to drop a nuke on the whole town? That seems like almost the only viable option.
yeah, exactly. And that's actually another thing that I think is great about this movie. It doesn't step into the supernatural side of the horror genre. It remains more realistic, and I think that's a good idea. And like I said earlier, many of the Halloween sequels took a more supernatural approach, especially with his niece and the whole cult storyline. And also, even in the remakes, I think that in the remakes, the first one felt a little bit more realistic, and then in the second one, it was kind of hard to tell, if it was stepping into the more supernatural side. And that's the thing. I think the more realistic approach for this franchise is the scarier. And I'm not saying supernatural isn't scary, of course it is, but this type of story that it's telling, it works better when you tell a realistic story, especially with Michael Myers.
Yes, I completely agree, especially as somebody who absolutely despises the supernatural Cult of Thorn sequels for the Halloween franchise. That's when this series really jumped the shark. Like, oh yeah, let's take this, pretty basic but terrifying slasher killer and let's give him all this bizarre supernatural backstory and weird, creepy stuff with his niece, and just keep piling on and piling on and piling on until eventually nobody cares.
Well, and another thing that I think does stand out, I wasn't going to bring this up originally, but something that I do like is about the movie is Laurie's relationship with her family, her daughter Karen and her husband, and also her granddaughter Allison. I think that when I was talking about how Jamie Lee Curtis portrays trauma so well, I think it adds a nice layer to the film showing how the trauma not only affected her, and like you were saying, the lives of other people, it also had a huge impact on her family in general. And I think that was a nice touch to explore in the movie as well.
Yeah, I feel like that showing that kind of further emphasizes that, Michael didn't just have this profound effect on Laurie, but he's having this profound effect on everybody basically associated with her.
Yeah, exactly. But what about you? Do you have any other big pros about the movie that you wanted to talk about?
I want to actually highlight the cinematography in this movie, actually.
Yes.
I know that's something that doesn't really get brought up too much in horror movies unless we're talking about like the old classic black and whites or the classic haunting flicks. But my favorite scene in this movie, my absolute favorite scene in this movie, is when the true crime podcasters go to the mental hospital that Michael is staying at, and the male podcaster pulls out his mask and shows it to him, and every other patient turns and stares at it. It's like Pandora's box is opening. I love the way it's shot. It's like, oh my God, what have you done? You've opened, you've released the evil. Well, again.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a great scene that we saw in the movie.
And I also just want to highlight there's some great kills and some genuine scares in this movie. Like the scene in the, what was it, a gas station or a truck stop bathroom where Michael reaches over and just casually drops the teeth of the other podcaster. It's like, well, that's a level of viciousness that we haven't seen from Michael Myers in quite a while.
Agreed. Yeah,
Plus,
of course.
and that shows that Michael's not just a brain dead zombie either. That takes, intelligence. That takes thought. Like, okay, I'm not just gonna kill him. I want to make him terrified before I do it. How can I do that?
Absolutely. But yeah, why don't we get into a couple of our cons with this movie? So here is my biggest con with the film. And we've talked about this before, but here's my biggest problem with the movie. I really do not like the title. And here's why. So you call the movie Halloween, which the problem with that is there were already two movies called Halloween before it. There was Halloween from 1978 and the Halloween remake from 2007. So this is the third movie in the established Halloween franchise called Halloween. And for me personally, when franchises create a new entry in a franchise, they just when they create a new entry and they give it the same exact title as the first movie, I just think it's annoying and it's also confusing. And it's just never, it doesn't feel like a good idea when they do that.
Yeah, especially because all the sequels in this reboot, this trilogy, all have subtitles. So I feel like maybe this one should have had it.
You could have called it Halloween Returns.
Halloween Returns or Halloween Reborn, maybe.
Yeah, Halloween Reborn. That'd be a good idea. Or just anything. But yeah, all I'm saying is just what I think the point I'm trying to make is just if you want to create a new entry, then fine, but don't call it the same thing as the first movie.
Yes, I'd be more forgiving of that if, like, okay, this is a completely separate timeline or a completely new timeline. But the fact that it ties into the first one really grinds my gears that they called this Halloween and not Halloween something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a viable complaint, even though that's more about marketing than the actual film itself. So
Yeah, but other than that, my only big complaint with this movie actually has to do with the ending. Now, I'm not talking about the showdown or anything. I thought the showdown between Laurie and her family and Michael was satisfying, but Laurie, when she traps Michael in the basement and then sets the house on fire and leaves him for dead, she doesn't make sure that he's dead first. She just leaves him for dead there. But she spent 40 years waiting for this. And instead of making sure that he's dead, she just leaves him for dead in there without, just double checking to make sure that he stays in there or just stays dead. And I get why they didn't do that because they wanted to leave the door open for sequels. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a con that I have with the ending.
yeah, I kind of agree, but I kind of don't because I feel like basically Lori threw everything she had at the guy. Like, I mean, if he's trapped in a basement in a burning house, that's gonna explode. You gotta think, okay, he can't possibly survive this. So I'm a little bit more forgiving of that because 9 out of 10 people I'm sure wouldn't survive that circumstance.
Maybe. But what about you? What are your cons with the movie?
Um, I don't really have too many. I did thoroughly enjoy this movie. Actually, I don't know if I remember. I didn't see it opening night, but I definitely saw it opening weekend. And the theater I saw it in was packed. And this was middle of nowhere, northern Maine. So that's saying something. I think if there's anything, I feel like some of the side characters were kind of pointless in this one.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with that.
Just the obvious, like, oh, you're gonna definitely get killed. Like the kind of nerdy character who's got the crush on Laurie's granddaughter.
Yep. Yeah, he did seem like someone who was probably going to die. I was actually surprised that her boyfriend didn't die in this one. Obviously, he dies in the second one, but I kept thinking, okay, yeah, he's probably going to die. Her friends are probably going to die, and yeah, it's not one of those movies where you're kind of rooting for people to die. You kind of just look around and think, okay, yeah, they probably won't.
You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're probably gonna die. You're gonna die first. You're annoying, so you're definitely gonna die in the most splattery way possible. Um, yeah, but that's a nitpick. That happens in a lot of horror movies, not just this one. So,
Yeah, agreed. But for a rating, what would you give this on a scale of 1 to 10?
not the best horror movie ever made, but certainly not the worst. I did enjoy it. I'll give it a solid 8.
Okay. I think I'll give it a 7.5 because I do enjoy the movie. Again, it's not the best Halloween movie. That's still the first one, but it's still a good entry in the franchise. So yeah, I'll give it a 7.5.
Actually, I probably do have one more thing. I probably would have bumped it up even more, but this movie kind of doesn't have a whole lot of memorable kills. It's got some memorable moments, but not memorable kills, if that makes any sense.
I think that's kind of because a lot of the kills happen off screen.
Yeah, that is something. Okay, maybe I'll bump it down to a 7.75. But that's still an enjoyable movie. I definitely didn't regret seeing it like I did the third one in this for series. But that's a conversation for another time.
All right, guys, I think that that's going to be the end of this review. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you later. Thanks. Bye.